Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, Honors English 7th grade. This lesson is for Tuesday, October 13th. It is a recording of lesson 6, and it is called Revising to Go Deeper. We are going to reread a couple of pieces for Red Scarf Girl. Well, one piece for Red Scarf Girl from the solo the last time to jog your memory about what's going on and answer a couple of questions. And then we will do an exit ticket and then read again for a solo. So here we go. I'm going to present now. Okay, and Amplify, this is what you see when you log in. Okay, this is your login page. We're going to 7A Red Scarf Girl on narrative. This is the next page that you see. We're going to subunit to Red Scarf Girl on Memoir of the Cultural Revolution. This is the next page. And we are going to lesson 6, Revising to Go Deeper. For this lesson, we are going to skip over the first couple of tabs and go directly to tab 4. The last time we read the last half of Dalziel, I am going to reread that portion to you very quickly so that it will jog your memory as to what happened in that reading. Okay. On card 1, this is where I'm going to start writing Dalziel. And if you are going to be looking in the book to read along, it is on page 59, paragraph 23. A few days later, when I got to school, I was told we were going to post Dalziel on the houses of some of the bourgeoisie living near the school. The class was divided into 2 groups. One was going to confront Old Can, a stern and frightening man who stalked our alley, speaking to no one. The other group was going to challenge Zhang Shi-wen, an unpleasant woman who lived in a house behind the schoolyard. I was assigned to the group going to Zhang Shi-wen's house. Of course, this was not coincidence. They all knew that she was my relative. Aunt Zhang Shi-wen was really my father's cousin, but I always called her aunt. She was at least 50 years old, but she dressed stylishly and wore makeup, so she looked closer to 30. I knew my classmates didn't like her one bit. What makes her think she's so wonderful, they sneered. Just look at those clothes she got from her sister in America. Look at her makeup, bourgeois, disgusting. I had always disapproved of her too. Chairman Mao taught us that inner beauty is much more valuable than outward appearance. How could she ignore what Chairman Mao said? Song Popo had told me that even An Shi-wen's youngest son often grumbled about his mother's behaviors. Just a few weeks earlier, An Shi-wen had complained to the school because some students then climbed into her yard to pick mulberry leaves for their silkworms. This latest affront was too much for the students to bear. About 20 of us formed a straggling column. Yin Lan Lan was first in line. She carried the Dalziel, and Du Hai, carrying a brush and a bucket of paste, followed her. Behind them, 2 students struck a gong and beat a drum. Let's go, Yin Lan Lan waved her arm vigorously, and the group marched off. I watched her with interest. Yin Lan Lan had changed a great deal. No longer hesitant and clumsy, she had become vocal, aggressive, and confident. She stood up straight and threw out her chest, whereas before she had always slouched. She and Du Hai had taken the leading roles in this movement. The usual leaders of the class, including me, were holding back for some reason. Yu Zhan, chairman of the class and one of the best students, was somewhere in the middle of the line while I dawdled so that I could be in the back of the group. I didn't want An Shi-wen to see me. Although I didn't approve of her and although I supported today's revolutionary action, she was still my relative. But I dared not ask to switch to the other group. I would certainly be criticized for letting my family relationships interfere with my political principles. I had no choice but to go. Someone rang the bell. We waited in the narrow passageway outside the door, whispering among ourselves. Before long, An Shi-wen came to the door. She was not wearing makeup, and she looked older and less attractive than usual. She seemed taken aback at the sight of us. Her welcoming expression turned into one of nervous surprise. Du Hai took the lead. Down with the bourgeois, Zhang Shi-wen! Long live Mao Zedong! Thought! He shouted. We repeated the slogans. Then Yin Lan Lan recited, Our great leader, Chairman Mao, has taught us. Every reactionary is the same. If you do not hit him, he will not fall. This is also like sweeping the floor. As a rule, where the broom does not reach, the dust will not vanish by itself. Her voice was loud and forceful. Today, we, proletarian revolutionary young guards, have come to revolt against your bourgeoisie. Zhang Jiwen, this is our Dalziba. You are to post it on your door now. She shook the white paper in front of An Shiwen's nose. An Shiwen tried to smile to show her support of the proletarian revolutionary young guards, but the smile froze before it was fully formed. It was hard to tell whether she was smiling or crying. Yes, yes, I will, she said repeatedly. She took the paste and began to brush it on the door. I could see the brush quivering in her hand. It was an unusually hot and humid day, and with the 20 of us crowded into her entryway, it felt even hotter. An Shiwen gave the door a few more good swipes of paste before she stopped and wiped the sweat off her forehead. Then she took the Dalziba and stuck it to the door, smoothing it out without hesitation in spite of the ink that blacked her hands. Now read it out loud, Yin Lan Lan shouted as soon as An Shiwen finished. An Shiwen had not expected this. She gaped at us in alarm. She did not want to read the terrible things written about her, but she did not dare refuse. Her face was ugly with distress. She knew that no one would challenge anything we revolutionaries did to her. I did not want her to see me. I bent down and pretended to tie my shoelaces, but I could not block out her voice, dry, hoarse, and trembling. Refusal to let students pick mulberry leaves was an attack on proletarian students. The more you try to improve your outward appearance, the filthier your heart becomes. Your black bourgeois bones are clearly visible to our proletarian eyes. Remold yourself conscientiously. I kept my eyes on my shoelaces and tried not to listen. Hey, what's the matter with you? Someone pushed me, and I realized that it was over. On the way back to school, everyone joked and laughed at An Shiwen's humiliation. Jingji Li, your aunt, really lost face today, didn't she? Duhai shouted. I could feel every classmate staring at me. I raised my head and said loudly, it serves her right. I made an effort to laugh and joke along with the others. Look at that, someone said with surprise. I raised my head. The door of Grandpa Hong's bookstall had been sealed with several Dalziba. It was too far away to read them. All I could make out were a few words from the titles of the poster. Propagating feudal, capitalistic, and revisionist ideals, poisoning our youth. My mind was full of all the stories I had read there. Now the stories were finished. They were part of the bad system that was going to destroy socialism. I shook my head hard as if to shake all the evil stories out of my mind. Ji Li, come on, come to school right now. Someone's written a Dalziba about you. Let's go. An Yi dashed into our apartment full of alarm. She dragged me to my feet and pulled me to the stairs. Wait, I shook off her grasp. Hold on, what did you say? Your name appeared in a Dalziba. I could not believe it. My name? Why? I'm not a teacher. Why would they write a Dalziba about me? I could feel my heart race. I don't know, but I saw it with my own eyes. Duhai and Yin Lan Lan and a couple of others were writing it. I couldn't read it, but I saw your name in the title. She wheezed heavily and looked at me wide-eyed. We hurried off to the school playground with the newest Dalziba were posted and searched frantically. There it is! Suddenly I caught sight of it. The large red characters were like blood on the poster. Let's look at the relationship between King Cheng Li, and his favorite student, Zhang Jili. I suddenly felt dizzy. Relationship? Me? A relationship with a male teacher? The whole world faded before my eyes. The only things I could see were the name Zhang Jili and the word relationship. A shaft of evening sunlight flashed on my name. The characters danced before my eyes, growing larger and redder, almost swallowing me up. An Yi was shaking me. Her eyes were full of tears, and she was staring at me anxiously. I could not speak. I grabbed her arm, and we ran out of the schoolyard. We stopped at the back door of a small cigarette shop nearby. An Yi tried to say something, but I wouldn't let her. We leaned against the wall for a long time without saying a word. Let's go home, An Yi touched me softly on the elbow. It was getting dark. You go ahead. I'm going to read the word Dalziba stuck in my throat. An Yi nodded worriedly and left. A half moon brightened the sky, and the schoolyard was laced with the ghostly shadows of the parasol trees. I picked my way through the shadows and found the Dalziba again. Now under the cover of darkness, I could let myself cry. I wiped the tears away with my hand, but the more I wiped, the more they came. I pressed my handkerchief to my face. Finally, my eyes cleared enough to see. Keng Chi Li liked working class kids. He only liked rich kids. or doesn't like working class kids, sorry. He only likes rich kids. He named Zhang Ji Li the teacher's assistant for math class and gave her higher grades. And he also let her win all the math contests and awarded her a lot of notebooks. We have to question, what is the relationship between them after all? The blood rushed into my head. I felt like throwing up. I leaned against the wall and rested my head on it. So basically, they are accusing her of receiving things without earning them because Ki Cheng Li, the teacher, gave them to her. And they're questioning what kind of relationship they have. A shadow approached. I tensed and got ready to run. The shadow called out, "Julie, it's me. I came back. I was getting worried." Anyi's voice made the tears gush out of my eyes again. Oh, Anyi, how could they say these things? How could they say them? A relationship between teacher Ki and me? It's all lies. My voice was hoarse. It's so unfair. I have never gotten 1 point, not a single point that I didn't deserve, and I spent so much time helping Yin Lan Lan and the others with their arithmetic. And now they go and insult me? It's disgusting. I could not go on. I bit my handkerchief to hold back my sobs. Anyi kept silent for a while. She walked beside me with her hand tightly clasping my shoulder. There were a lot of dalziba about my mom, too, she said at last in a soft voice. They said she was a monster and a class enemy. I stopped. I was afraid to look at her. Her hand squeezed my shoulder and I felt her sobbing quietly. We stood together like that for a long time in the darkness and the silence. Okay, so in the last session, we are on tab 4, card 1. We read that most of Geely's classmates were eager to write dalziba about their teachers while Geely was unable to write anything. Highlight a phrase or sentence in today's reading where Geely is unable or unwilling to join the crowd. Go to card 2. Why doesn't Geely enjoy participating in the Cultural Revolution as much as her classmates? Write 2 to 4 sentences. Think about this. The other classmates were the ones that did so horribly in school. She did wonderfully in school and really excelled. That might have something to do with it. Tab 5 is wrap up. In the wrap up, we are going to listen to a read aloud of the very first part of the next chapter, which is called The Red Successors. And I want you to think about what you think is going on. So it's an inference question.
It was my turn now. My mind was blank. I did not know what to say. I stood up slowly. The back of my blouse suddenly soaked with sweat.
So basically, it's asking you to infer or guess at what you think is happening here. And we're going to find out very soon. Tab 6 is the exit ticket. On tab 6, you have to jag 3 moments that show Geely's internal conflict during the presentation of Ang Shi Wen's dalziba. Okay. Letter A says, I would certainly be criticized for letting my family relationships interfere with my political principles. I had no choice but to go. Letter B says, but I could not block out her voice, dry, hoarse, and trembling. Letter C says, I could see the brush quivering in her hand. It was an unusually hot and humid day, and with the 20 of us crowded into our entryway, it felt even hotter. Letter D says, although I did not approve of her, and although I supported today's revolutionary action, she was still my relative. And letter E says, I did not want her to see me. I bent down and pretended to tie my shoes. You must choose 3 that show Geely's inside conflict during the presentation of Ang Shi Wen's dalziba. Okay? This is not during. This is during. This is also during, but it describes what she's doing. This is during. That's during. Figure out which one is an internal conflict, not necessarily, what her thoughts are about how she feels. Pick 3 of those. And now we are on to the solo. This is a brand new reading. It is the next piece of reading, and it is called The Red Successor. In this piece, we are going to start with the very beginning of page 65. And if you give me just a second, I will tell you how far we are going to go. We're going to go to, and if I can just click on this, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And it's not working. Okay, so just read along as I read to you with the reading. The Red Successors. And it starts on page 65. When Mom and Dad heard about the Dazzi Bell, they immediately suggested that I stay home from school for a few days since there were no classes. Other students were staying home too. Nobody would connect my absence with Dazzi Bell. As it turned out, I came down with a fever and stayed home for 10 days. I lay in bed all day and watched Grandma and Song Popo work around the house. I was too tired and too depressed to do any more than watch them and watch a patch of sunlight as it moved across the room. As the fever subsided, I began to feel better, but Grandma said I should stay home a few more days to make sure I was completely well. For the first time in my life, I was happy to miss school. Both Song Popo and Grandma tried their best to cheer me up. Song Popo combed my hair and made me treats. Grandma sat by my bed, took out my stamp collection, and tried to get me to take an interest in it. Finally, Grandma bought some lovely soft gray wool for me and taught me how to knit a sweater for Dad. I worked on it every day while the others were in school, but slowly with many pauses while I stared out the window. Why would anyone say such terrible things about me? Why did Yin Lan Lan and Du Hai hate me? What had I ever done to hurt them? I asked myself these questions again and again, but I never found an answer. Every day An Yi came to visit, sometimes bringing me a bowl of sweet green bean soup from her grandmother. Every day she told me what was happening at school. Classes had started again. They were studying Chairman Mao's latest directives and related documents from the Central Committee. There would be 1 more month of school before graduation. An Yi said that not many of our classmates had seen the Dazzi Bao about me. And there were now so many Dazzi Bao posted one on top of another that no one was likely to find mine. Red Guards were everywhere. Since the newspapers had praised them as the pioneers of the Cultural Revolution, every high school and college had organized Red Guards to rebel against the old system. When the Central Committee had announced the Red Guards could travel free to other provinces to establish revolutionary ties with other Red Guards, An Yi told me our entire school had gone into an uproar. Most of the students had never been out of Shanghai, so this was terribly exciting news. A large crowd of students from our school had gathered outside the school committee offices and shouted nonstop, "We want to be Red Guards. We want to establish revolutionary ties." Only college and high school students were allowed to be Red Guards, but our school district had finally granted our school permission to establish the Red Successors. Just as the name indicated, the Red Successors were the next generation of revolutionaries, and when they were old enough, they would become Red Guards. 10 Red Successors were to be elected from each class. An Yi brought me a note from Teacher Gu saying she hoped I was feeling better and would come back to school for the election on Saturday. Friday afternoon, a thunderstorm struck. The darkness gathered until I could not see my book. The first flash of lightning drew me to the window as the downpour began. I sat on a porcelain stool, leaning my forehead against the cool window panes. The torrent overflowed the gutters, and a curtain of rainwater leapt off the roof. Wind-blown spray blurred the window. The alley was washed clean. Dirt and trash were swept away by the flood. I stared at the downpour and pictured all the Dazzi Bao in the schoolyard. I opened the window and shivered with delight at the clean, chill air swept over me. A blast soaked my face, and I laughed. From behind me, a hand reached out to pull the window shut. Grandma smiled down at me. She knew exactly what I was thinking. She gently wrapped my robe around my shoulders. I lay contentedly in her arms as the rain washed away my humiliation and shame. So she's thinking that, with this rain, it's not only symbolic that it washes away all of the dirt, but it will also wash away all of the ink from the Dalziel that are hung up. By morning, the storm had passed. When we got to school, we found that all the Dalziel were gone. Sodden fragments littered the schoolyard with only a few torn and illegible remnants dangling on the ropes. The paper with my name on it had disappeared. I sighed with relief and went to class feeling better than I had in a long time. During the time I was home, summer had arrived. The windows of the classroom were all open, and the fragrance from the oleander bushes outside filled the air, heavy, rich, and warm. The classroom itself looked nicer. All the Dalziel had been taken down and replaced by other things. A big color poster, at least 6 feet by 3 feet, hung in the middle of the back wall. It showed a big red flag with Chairman Mao's picture and a long line of people marching under the flag. On the right side of the room, the slogan, "Long live the great proletarian cultural revolution," covered almost the entire wall. I was cheered by the revolutionary atmosphere. Teacher Gu walked in, and the election for the red successors began. I lowered my head and pretended to check my nails. I wanted everyone to see that I did not care if I was not chosen. My parents and grandma had warned me against disappointment, so I was prepared. And anyway, the red successors were not nearly as glorious as the red guards. Yu Zhan, the chairman of our class, was the first one nominated. Then I heard my name called. My heart raced and I held my breath. I could hardly believe it. I was nominated. After everything that had happened, I was still regarded as somebody in the class. Now I could admit to myself I had never wanted anything as much as I wanted to win this election. I looked gratefully at the student who had nominated me. Teacher Gu was about to write the names of the candidates on the blackboard when Yin Lan Lan raised her hand. When the Red Guards were elected at my sister's schools, the class status of the candidates was taken into account. Shouldn't we do the same? Right. Those who don't have good class backgrounds shouldn't be elected, somebody else agreed. My heart fell. Class status. There was that phrase again. At a loss for anything to say, I turned around and looked at Yu Zhan. Yu Zhan stood up without hesitation. My class status is office worker, but before liberation, my father used to be an apprentice. He had to work at the shop counter when he was in his teens, and he suffered all kinds of exploitation by the owner. My father is a member of the Communist Party now, and my mother will join pretty soon. All hands were raised to elect him a red successor. It was my turn now. My mind was blank. I did not know what to say. I stood up slowly, the back of my blouse suddenly soaked with sweat. My class status is also office worker. My father is an actor. I stumbled, trying to remember that Yu Zhan had said. He is not a party member, and neither is my mother, and I don't know what else. Zhanji Li, what is your father's class status? A loud voice asked. I slowly stood up and looked around. Du Hai was staring at me, sat sideways, one arm resting on the back of on the desk behind him. My father's class status? I did not see what Du Hai meant at first. You mean, what did my grandfather do? I don't know. I only know that he died when my father was 7. There was a trace of a grin on Du Hai's face. He stood up lazily and faced the class. I know what her grandfather was. He paused dramatically, sweeping his eyes across the class. He was a landlord. Landlord? The whole class erupted. What's more, her father is a rightist. Rightist? The class was in pandemonium. I was numb. Landlord? One of the bloodsuckers who exploited the farmers? The number one enemies, the worst of the 5 black categories, even worse than criminals or counter-revolutionaries? My grandfather? And Dad a rightist? One of the reactionary intellectuals who attacked the party and socialism? Nah, I couldn't believe it. You're lying. You don't know anything, I retorted. Of course I know, Du Hai smirked openly. My mother is the neighborhood party committee secretary. She knows everything. I could say nothing now. Through my tears, I could see everyone staring at me. I wished I had never been born. I pushed the desk out of my way and ran out of the classroom. Outside, it was so bright that I could barely see. Shading my eyes with my hand, I jumped blindly into the dazzling sunshine and ran home. Grandma was frightened by the tears streaming down my face. What happened? Are you hurt? She put her spatula down and grasped my hand, asking again and again. At first, I couldn't answer. Finally, still sobbing and managing to tell her what had happened. It isn't true, is it? I sobbed. Grandpa wasn't a landlord, was he? Dad isn't a rightist, is he? Of course your father's not a rightist. Don't listen to your classmates, Grandma said immediately. But she sounded nervous. And Grandpa wasn't a landlord either, right? I looked straight into Grandma's eyes. Grandma heaved a sigh and hugged me to her chest. Whatever he was, it doesn't have anything to do with you. He's been dead for over 30 years. It was true then, Grandpa was a landlord. I did not want to listen anymore. I turned away. Okay, so now, part 3. This question has 2 parts. What does G. Lee do as the election for the Red successor begins? A, pass out flyers. B, admire the changes in the classroom. C, check her nails. Or D, stare out the window. Why did G. Lee do this? A, she was hoping she wouldn't win. B, she was prepared to win. C, she preferred to be a Red Guard instead. D, she wanted to appear as if she didn't care about being chosen. Card 4. Number 2, this question has 2 parts again. What is the worst of the 5 Black categories? A, counter-revolutionary. B, landlord. C, rightist. D, criminal. What is considered the worst of the 5 Black categories? Go back into the reading and refer back to the reading to find that answer. Part 5, why were other students staying home from school when G. Lee first got sick? A, they were sick too. B, there were no classes. C, they were afraid of having Dao Zibao written about them. D, they went to hear Chairman Mao speak in another city. Card 6, what was G. Lee wondering while she was home with a fever for 10 days? A, how she got sick. B, why An Yi was visiting her. C, why some of her classmates were being mean to her. D, what they were studying in school. Card 7. Which of these things was not done to help G. Lee feel better? A, G. Lee had her hair combed. B, G. Lee had treats made for her. C, G. Lee was taught how to knit. D, G. Lee was given new stamps for her stamp collection. Go back into the story to refer to find that answer. 6. Card 8. How did An Yi comfort Ji Li? A, she bought lovely gray wool for Ji Li and taught her how to knit. B, she made fun of Du Hai and Yin Lan Lan to make Ji Li laugh. C, she brought Ji Li soup and told her that the Dao Zibao about her were covered up. D, she combed Ji Li's hair and made her treats. And that's her friend. Okay, last part. Number 7. Paragraph 7 explains the differences between Red Guards and Red Successors. Drag the correct answer to each question below. Which sentence shows a benefit of being a Red Guard? Which sentence shows a benefit of being a Red Successor? Which sentence shows why Ji Li's classmates shouted outside the committee offices? A, every high school and college had organized Red Guards to rebel against the old system. B, Red Guards could travel free to other provinces. C, most of the students had never been out of Shanghai. D, they wanted to become Red Guards but couldn't because only college and high school students were allowed to join. E, Red Successors were the next generation of revolutionaries, and then when they were old enough, they would become Red Guards. Which sentence shows a benefit of being a Red Guard? Which sentence shows a benefit of being a Red Successor? Which sentence shows why Ji Li's classmates shout outside the committee offices? Okay, so just make sure that you hand that in when you are finished. This concludes the recording. I hope that I do see you in class. If not, I hope this recording helps you to make sure that you do the exit ticket and the solo for this week. I hope that you have a great day, and I will see you soon.